Mr. President, I wanted to talk today about our growing economy. I listened to my colleague from Wyoming's comments about the importance of the tax legislation. I couldn't agree with him more. I think it is stimulating not just economic growth, but higher wages, more jobs. I also want to talk about the need for us to connect Americans who are not currently employed to those jobs. And then I want to talk about some very shocking new information we have about why people are outside of the workforce. We just had a good jobs report from April. It showed a steadily growing economy. It showed unemployment at 3.9%. That's the official number, but that's the lowest the official number has been since the year 2000. In my home state of Ohio, there was a recent survey done by PNC Bank, and they've been doing this for 9 years, and they asked small and mid-sized companies, what's your level of optimism about the future? They said that their business optimism is at record levels for the past 9 years. So there's something going on that's very good in the economy. If you talk to the small business community, the National Federation of Independent Business surveys show the same thing, not just optimism, but also a sense that companies are getting ready to invest even more. So there's some good things going on in our economy. The Ohio Chamber of Commerce this week, by the way, issued its own report, and it showed something interesting, which is that 3 out of 4 businesses in Ohio are saying that they want to add people. 3 out of 4. More than half of them said they want to add more than 25 people. I can't go to a business in Ohio. I was just home. I had a lot of interactions with small business people over the last week. I can't go where I don't hear people talking about the need for a qualified workforce. And so they tell me, yes, the tax bill is helping, no question about it. It's helping middle-class families throughout my state. 90% of Americans are getting a paycheck that says Uncle Sam's going to withhold less money, on average $2,000 for a median income family in Ohio, just from the tax cuts alone, this year alone. Small businesses, again, are investing more. Companies are doing everything from investing in people with bonuses and higher pay and better 401k matches to investing in equipment and technology and therefore productivity of those workers, which will lead to a better economic performance. So those things are happening. On the regulatory front, I also think that much of what we've done here in Congress is beginning to help. This includes 16 different times where Congress has said we shouldn't have this new regulation that was put on by the Obama administration at the end of its term, and rather we ought to free up the economy more, over $60 billion, by the way, relief to our economy. That's helping. I think it's also very, very helpful, as Senator Barrasso said, that with regard to the administration, there's a new attitude, which is, yes, we need rules and regulations. Let's make sure they make sense, and let's make sure that we partner with business to try to help them comply with those rules and regulations, rather than an attitude of saying, let's try to find out how we can punish businesses for not complying. I think that difference alone may be even larger than what we've done here in Congress in terms of passing this legislation to eliminate regulations, because that attitude change has helped, particularly small businesses in my state, feel like, okay, they have an opportunity now to be able to take a risk, to take a chance, to invest more, not thinking that the federal government is out there to get them. So I see that, and I'm really happy to see it, because it's not, again, just about growing the economy. It's actually, over the past few months, if you look at the numbers, showing that for the first time in really a decade and a half, that we see wages starting to go up in my home state and around the country. That's what we should all want. But let me talk about something that, that concerns me greatly about the direction we're on. Again, positive. The economy's picking up. Things are doing well. Workers that I talk to are happy with the tax bill because it's helping them, both directly through their families and through the benefits they're getting at work. But what I'm hearing is that workforce is really the challenge. And when you look at that, you come up with a really shocking situation where the reason there aren't people showing up for work is because we have a record number of men and probably close to a record number of men and women. You probably have to go back to the 1970s to find these kind of numbers, who are out of the workforce altogether. Now, what does that mean? This means they aren't working and they're not looking for work, so they're not showing up in the unemployment numbers. So a number of 3.9%, again, the best since 2000, that's all good news, but that's not the real number. And I say that with respect because the Bureau of Labor Standards does the best they can, but they can't include the people who aren't trying to find work. Those people are outside of the workforce. What the economists call this is a low labor force participation rate. In other words, the low percentage of Americans who are even showing up. That concerns me a lot because, one, obviously it's hurting the economy. You have this huge pool of workers out there, 8.5 million men between the ages of 25 and 55, able-bodied men who are in this category. Unemployed, yes, but not even looking for work, so not showing up in these numbers. When you add women and men together, millions of Americans. So we need them in the economy now. It's important for these businesses I'm talking to in Ohio, small businesses who are looking for people. But even more concerning to me is what's happening to these people and to these families, because they are not getting the dignity and self-respect that comes from work. They are not able to achieve whatever their goal is in life, their piece of the American dream. They're missing out. They're in the sidelines. The 3.9%, by the way, I said is not a real number. Why do I say that? Because if you go back to the normal labor force participation rate we talked about, people actually working in our workforce at a more normal level, the unemployment number would be far higher. How high would it be? Well, you can go back to the year before the Great Recession, when we had a more traditional workforce participation rate, similar to what we've had really since the Great Depression. With that labor force participation rate attached to today's economy, the unemployment number would not be 3.9%, it would be 8.6%. Now, if we were to talk about an 8.6% unemployment rate, we'd all be very concerned, wouldn't we? We should be very concerned, because that's the real number. We need a more concerted effort to get those Americans off the sidelines and back to work for all the right reasons. So who are they? It's a complicated question, but I think it comes down to primarily four things. One is there are people that don't have the skills that meet the needs out there. So today in Ohio, if you go on Ohio Means Jobs, our website, you'll see about 140,000 jobs being offered. And yet there are about 250,000 people out of work. You'll see that a number of these jobs require a certain level of skill. People are looking for welders. They're looking for technology expertise, including coding. They're looking for people in the biosciences or the healthcare professions where you have to have a certain level of skill. And what workers are finding in Ohio is if they don't have those skills, it's harder to get those jobs. So there is a skills gap. There's no question about it. And we should be addressing that. And here in Congress, by the way, we have a great opportunity to do that through some relatively common sense legislation. One is called the Jobs Act, well named. The Jobs Act says quite simply, if you're going to have a Pell Grant to go to college, shouldn't you be able to get a Pell Grant to go into a short-term training program? Because what employers will tell you is they don't need a 2-year training program. They still don't need a 4-year college degree. What they need is somebody who's willing to go through a training program to get the ability to learn how to weld, or the ability to learn how to code, or even a commercial driver's license program. All these programs, by the way, can be less than 15 weeks, and you can get people to work. But guess what? You can't get a Pell Grant for less than 15 weeks. So our goal with the Jobs Act is really very simple. Let's kind of level the playing field here. Let's give young people who may not choose to go to college, at least now, but understand those jobs are out there. And we're talking good jobs here, jobs making 40, 50, 60,000 bucks a year with benefits. They're waiting right now. These jobs are open. Let's give them the ability, because they're low-income families, they can't afford these training programs, to be able to take advantage of Pell Grants, just as they would if they chose to go to a 4-year college or university or to a community college for a couple years. Senator Kaine and I have introduced this legislation with a bipartisan group. We think it's something we ought to do right away. So that's who are these people? The skills gap is part of it, and that's a specific idea, just one of many, to be able to get people the skills they need. Second, there's something I guess I would call the dependency trap. These are people who are on a government dependency program, and they are not working. And when they look at going to work, they see two things. One, they see a reduction in their benefits. That's pretty obvious. But second, they see an increase in their taxes. Now, the tax bill actually helps here because it actually reduces taxes for those at the bottom of the economic ladder. Specifically, I will tell you, because I asked the Joint Committee on Taxation this, and they gave me an official response, 3 million Americans who currently have income tax liability based on last year's tax code, in other words, the code that was changed at the end of last year, 3 million Americans no longer have any income tax liability. That's good, because that'll help with this transition from welfare to work, because although people may be losing those benefits, some of those people are not going to see that cliff where they suddenly have a relatively high tax to pay. And that's good. But we can do more there. We can do more there to assure that people who are willing to make that step out of welfare into work are not penalized by this tax cliff. So I think the dependency trap is also part of the issue for this unprecedented level of people who are outside of the workforce altogether, and we need to address it. I think there should be more work requirement programs for able-bodied Americans who are on these dependency programs. I think that would help, partly to give them the work experience to be able to get the dignity and self-respect that comes with work as they step in to work, welfare to work transition. So that's certainly another issue. So it's the skills training, it's the dependency trap. Another issue that I think is very clear out there is that we have a lot of people in America who are getting out of prison or jail. And some of them have a record that makes it hard for them to get a job. And let's be honest, we've had record numbers of people behind bars. This was, started back in the 80s. We wanted to lock more people up for lots of good reasons because of the violence and the serious crimes they were committing. But 95% of the people in prison are going to get out someday. And when they do get out, we need to provide a better way for them to make that transition into work. Why? Because right now, more than half of those people are back in the system within a couple years. That makes no sense for anybody, particularly those who are subject to the crimes that might be committed during that period, and to the taxpayers who are paying $45,000 a year when you include incarceration and the prosecution, the additional costs that are associated with that. So should we do more there? Yes. Yes. There's legislation I'm supporting. I think it's called the Fair Chance Act. It says when somebody applies for a job in the federal government, as an example, they have to be allowed to go through the process even though they might have a felony record. Why? Because you want to give them a fair shake, not just take that resume and put it in the circular file, toss it, because you see a felony record. So we need to give some of those folks a chance. I was at a great program in Ohio last week. It's called Flying High Welding School in the Grow Urban Garden. And their job is to teach ex-offenders a skill. And they teach people how to work. A lot of them have not had a job before. But specifically, they teach them a welding skill that is badly needed in Northeast Ohio right now. And their placement record is unbelievable. And their recidivism is so low. In other words, they are not only placing people into jobs and working with businesses, kind of an apprenticeship type program. They call it a junior apprenticeship, where the workplace is actually working with the welding shops to give people work experience. But they are keeping people from going back into the prison system. And they've had a great record of doing it. They got a loan, and they also got some grant money from the federal government, including from the Department of Labor. And it's one of those programs that actually is working very well to give people the ability to get that job, to get out of that trap. And in this case, a lot of them have felony records, and to be able to take care of their families and be productive citizens. Very encouraging stories there. So the skills training we talked about, the dependency trap we talked about, the people who are coming out of prison at very high numbers now have this background. We need to be sure that those people are getting engaged and involved in work. But let me tell you what I think is the number one reason we have these historic levels of people who are on the sidelines, outside of work. And it won't surprise some of you because you're involved with this, my colleagues here in the chamber, including I see the chairman of the Government Affairs Committee has now arrived, and he's been very involved in this. But that's the opioid crisis. These numbers are shocking. But of those people who are out of work altogether, again, on the sidelines, not even trying to get into work, people that would lead our unemployment numbers to really be more like 8.6%, over 8.5% rather than 3.9%, millions of Americans, over 8.5 million men just between the ages of 25 and 55, able-bodied men. Of those people, based on 2 recent studies, about half of them are taking pain medication on a daily basis. And when asked, in one of the studies, 2/3 of them said it was prescription pain medication. What does that mean? That means that we have a huge problem in our country of opioid addiction, and that is keeping a lot of people out of the workforce altogether. By the way, tearing apart those families, causing more crime in our community. Number one cause of crime in my state of Ohio is the opioid epidemic. People who are often involved in things they would never dream of except for the fact that they have this addiction, which is a disease. So it's shoplifting, it's thievery, it's fraud. It's an issue that affects every part of our community. But I guess the point that I want to make today most strongly is it's affecting our labor market in a huge way. One study is by the Brookings Institution. It says 47% of men are taking pain medication on a daily basis. Again, 2/3 prescription. Now, that's not over-reported, I'll guarantee you, because of the stigma attached and because of the legal consequences for some of these individuals. So 47%, I think, has got to be viewed as a relatively low number, but isn't that shocking if it was 47%? Another study by the Department of Labor recently, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 44%. 44% taking pain medication the previous day. Now, these numbers should be a wake-up call for us here in this chamber. And it should be a wake-up call to everybody, including the business community. Because, again, as I go around my state, I'm seeing firsthand what the Ohio Chamber of Commerce just reported this week. 3 out of 4 businesses in Ohio want to add workers. Half of them want to add up to 25 workers. They can't find the workers. Here you've got millions of people at historic levels who are outside the workforce altogether, leading to an unemployment number that really should be over 8.5% instead of 3.9%. How do you get them back in? I think all 4 of the things we talked about today are important. But unfortunately, given the opioid epidemic in my state of Ohio and spreading around the country, I think this is probably the single largest problem that we face. Now, what are the solutions? We've made major strides here in the last year and a half in this chamber. We've passed the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. We've passed the Cures legislation. We're now working on additional legislation called the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act, or CARA 2.0. We are doing things we've never done before in terms of funding recovery, treatment, also prevention and education. We need to do more, but we've begun the process of turning the tide, I believe, by some of this legislation. We need to do more on the law enforcement side. We have legislation called the STOP Act that simply says, with regard to the most difficult problem we now face in Ohio and around the country, which is synthetic opioids, think fentanyl or carfentanil, let's at least stop the post office from being a conduit for that coming into our country, because that's what's happening. All the studies show, including one we just did in our committee, we spent a year studying this, it showed that this fentanyl is coming right through the Postal Service, mostly from China, by the way, and poisoning our communities. In Ohio, 2/3 of our deaths in Franklin County last year were from fentanyl. 60% of the deaths in the state of Ohio as a whole the year before from fentanyl. So this is our biggest problem we have right now. Just as we were making some progress on prescription drugs, then heroin comes along. Just as we're making progress on heroin, then the synthetic form of heroin comes along. It's cheap. It's incredibly powerful. 3 flakes of it can kill you. It's being spread on other drugs, including cocaine, crystal meth, I'm told, marijuana, I'm told, by law enforcement just last week, again, confirmed. So this is a huge issue. Can we do more? Yes, but we're starting to take some steps. Where I think we perhaps have an opportunity that we're not taking advantage of is to get the private sector, the business community, more engaged in this effort. Because Washington can and should do more, but the problem's not going to be solved here in Washington. It's going to be solved at the local level, isn't it? It's going to be solved in our communities, ultimately in our families, ultimately in our hearts. I think if we can get the business community more engaged, as an example, by pointing out these statistics, that you're looking for more workers, you're going to have to deal with this issue. Many workers are not able to pass the drug test. And so that's something the business community, I think, does understand. In fact, I just left a group of employers from Ohio about an hour and a half ago in my office, and I asked them the question I ask employers over our state: how many people can pass the drug test who show up? And the answer was about 30% can pass. Another guy said 50% are not passing. These are different kinds of businesses. Second one is a more heavy manufacturing business, a little lower income, little lower wages, and therefore lower income individuals. But the point is, a huge problem with passing the drug test. But what I said to them is what I'll say today, which is, it's much bigger than that. There are, again, millions of Americans not even showing up to take the drug test. They are sidelined, and we have to deal with this opioid epidemic. So what should the business community do? I have 3 ideas. One is, roll up your sleeves, get involved in your community on projects that do work. There's one in Columbus, Ohio. It's called the Mary Haven Stabilization Addiction Center. The business community got engaged. They took about $1 million from this place, from the Cures Act that we passed here, but they leveraged that with private sector money, foundation money. They now have a place there where they have a great success rate in getting people from overdosing and the application of this miracle drug, Narcan, which can reverse the effects of the overdose, and then into treatment. Unfortunately, in most parts of the country, people are revived by Narcan and then they go right back into the same environment they were in, the vast majority. Here, they've been able to figure out a way to have those who are overdosing to get to a central location where right there, right where the detox center is, there's also a door you walk through to 50 beds to be able to get people into treatment. They claim an 80 to 90% success rate of getting people into treatment. Do they stay in treatment? Not all of them. But that's the first big gap that I see in the system, is people who fall out of the system. Narcan's applied by our first responders. They're doing the best they can, but it's not their job to get them into treatment. And then people are going back home and unfortunately overdosing again and again. Talk to your first responders in your community about this. Go to your fire stations. Talk to your EMS personnel. Talk to your police officers. I assume they will tell you the same thing they tell me. So the business community was involved in that, thinking, let's look at this more like a business process. How can we actually help to change this obvious problem we've got in the current way in which people are treated and taken care of who overdose? Every business ought to roll up their sleeves and get involved in a creative, innovative project like that. Second, over the years, back in the 1980s and into the 1990s, there was significant private sector participation in a prevention and education program. Now, locally in my state of Ohio, some businesses are starting to think about how they can do this more effectively. I believe nationwide in Columbus is coming up with some very good ideas. But we need a significant investment from the private sector into a national messaging program, a prevention and education program. Back then, it was TV ads. You may remember the Just Say No program and other programs that were about prevention under President Reagan. But some of these ads were very effective. Some of you may remember the ad of, this is your brain, this is your brain on drugs, with fried eggs being cooked in a pan. That's your brain on drugs. That is not going to be TV ads today. It would be some TV. I hope it would be some broadcast media in various ways, but it would be a lot of online communication, because that's where most people are getting their information, particularly younger people. But it should be a concerted effort that's based on good research, good science. What's the prevention message that works out there? Part of the prevention message that works with some young people I talk to is the fact that all these street drugs are subject to the possibility of fentanyl being included in them. And some people are taking drugs they would never think were dangerous, and yet becoming addicted through fentanyl. So there is a danger out there of any street drug now, of ruining your life. But there is a broader prevention message that we need the private sector help. This place, again, has authorized more money for this. There's $10 million in CARE 2.0 for a prevention education program. That's good, but it's going to take more than that. And again, the business community and the private sector has a strong interest in this for so many reasons. But one, as we've talked about today, is to have that workforce they say they desperately need. There are other opportunities for the business community to be involved. Walgreens recently took a step that I thought was really important to limit the number of days on prescription drugs. But every single business that has a healthcare program has an opportunity to be involved in this, to say, let's limit prescriptions. Probably 8 out of 10 people who overdose from heroin or fentanyl today started with prescription drugs in terms of the opioid that got them started with their opioid addiction. There still is overprescribing with regard to prescription drugs. Have we made some progress? Yes. And our new legislation, by the way, CARE 2.0, has a 3-day limit on prescription drugs for acute pain, not for chronic pain, but for acute pain, like an accident or an injury, a procedure that you might have. And we have that in there because the CDC, Center for Disease Control, has new guidance out that shows after that 3rd day, the chances of addiction rise significantly. And for the vast majority of pain associated with acute procedures, 3 days is plenty. In fact, for many acute episodes, no opioids at all are needed as long as you use other pain medication. But that's something every business can do that provides health care. Every business that has a pharmacy can do, is to say, let's limit those prescriptions ourselves. You don't need a government program to do that. It doesn't need to be a government edict to do that or a mandate. They can just do it. So, look, I know this issue of the workforce is frustrating to a lot of employers out there. I know that the benefits of a great tax bill that is creating more economic opportunity, a better regulatory environment is providing real relief, is growing the economy in such positive ways. Wages are starting to go up. We see economic growth numbers that are really encouraging, showing that, in fact, this legislation is creating more economic growth and therefore more revenue, higher wages. The things we all had hoped would happen, the investment is happening. But again, we're not going to be able to take advantage of all that if we don't have the workforce out there. And when you've got millions of Americans, 8.5 million men between 25 and 55, able-bodied, as an example, who are on the sidelines, not even showing up to look for work, we're not going to be able to fulfill our potential in this country, for our economy or for them and for their families, to be able to achieve their God-given purpose in life, to have the dignity and self-respect that comes from work. And we listed 4 very specific issues today of how we need to address this issue of people who are sidelined, who are not in the workforce. But the one I think that probably has the most impact is the final one, and that's dealing with this opioid crisis. And unless and until we do that, we'll continue to see people fall between the cracks and see us as a country not meet our potential. Mr. President, I yield back my time.